Okay, so I'm heading out. I'm going outside here and it's snowing like crazy, so sorry guys. No looking at my face today. Haha, I'm sure the hundreds of millions of people that are actually watching this will definitely care that they don't get to see my face today. Things are ramping up for Bernie Sanders. That's the big news. Everybody's holding their breath looking at Bernie Sanders. Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. That's all I'm hearing about. I remember I got really hyped up because of Ron Paul, because of his anti-war stance back when the Iraq War was happening. This is before I understood that the game is rigged and there is no democracy in the United States. That the democracy that they have, the system exists only as a distraction, as a soothing balm, a way for the public to have arguments with itself so that they don't turn on each other through physical force. That's the purpose of it. But it certainly cannot ever actually stand up against the military-industrial complex. That is not permitted. The military-industrial complex owns the country, using its corporate connections in order to maintain social control, and monetary control, obviously. But it controls the rest of the planet through violence and through force, which is why it has there's such an enormous bloated military. And so this military force is perfectly happy to allow an organization like the White House and Congress and the Senate to exist, so long as those organizations continue to allow the military-industrial complex to do what it wants, unabated. And this is Obama. Obama created the drone program, right? George W. Bush, with his invasion of Iraq. And it goes all the way back. Clinton was doing it. Reagan definitely doing it. And back you go. Everybody, they all do it. All of these presidents. And there's no... So if Bernie Sanders stands up and says, well, we're going to stop all of this, and if he starts to gain some momentum and gain some speed, as it looks like he does, he's actually poised to win in Iowa, well, the Democratic Party will just stop him. And they'll stop him using a superdelegate system that's designed specifically to stop exactly this. They say that their verbiage is that, oh, the superdelegate system is there to prevent fringe elements from taking over the party. Of course, that argument is asinine. If the majority of the populace votes for someone, they're not a fringe element. They're the majority of your party. What I expect to see happen is that Bernie Sanders will win, and he'll win the nomination. He'll certainly have the majority of votes, and then the superdelegates will just stop him. And they'll appoint someone like Bloomberg, right? Someone like, probably not Biden, honestly, but someone who they know will cooperate with the corporate coup d'etat and the military-industrial complex, and they'll just override the will of the people. And this moment that's coming up, America has a real choice to make, and the citizens, the corporate citizens, are faced with a true dilemma. Of course, they don't want Bernie Sanders to win. nobody wanted Trump to win. But they're faced with this choice where it's either give up their wealth, and not even all their wealth. This is the thing that's insane about this, is that many of these very wealthy people will continue to be very wealthy. No one is saying that they will not be wealthy. They just won't be 100 billionaires or 10 billionaires. You know? Instead of having $100 billion, they'll have $1 billion, which is still an astronomical sum of money. So they have to choose between, well, maintaining a system that allows them to have so much money that it's irrelevant to them, or electing a fascist again. And Donald Trump is a fascist. Anybody who says otherwise is probably a fascist. Because look at him. I mean, he's got concentration camps, for God's sakes. Like, he's building a border wall. He's built this border wall. Right? The assassination of Soleimani, they're an invading, aggressive military force who is just constantly giving breaks to corporate power. And I mean, they're just the very definition of fascism. They just haven't fully turned against the populace quite yet, because the populace is still being ameliorated by the potential of a Sanders win in the Democratic Party. And this is why this moment is so important, because if the corporate powers and the corporate stooges who work as the superdelegates, if they just obliterate the will of the people, if they just say, forget that democracy thing we were doing, we're just going to appoint this fellow over here, it means fully a Trump victory, without a doubt, possibly the destruction of the Democratic Party, and possibly the destruction of democracy as a legitimate force in America. The whole point of democracy is that it doesn't matter whether or not the powerful people or the establishment people do or do not want a thing to occur. That's not relevant. The point of democracy is that the majority of people have their voices heard and is pushed through. And in many ways, I think that if the Democratic Party was in any way democratic, we wouldn't even have a Trump presidency. It's very likely that if the Democrats actually cared about democracy, they would have elected Sanders last time against Clinton. But they pulled all kinds of shenanigans on him, and they were underhanded in how they did things. But now Sanders has a real chance to be the unequivocal frontrunner. Against Clinton, there was always this like, oh, it was close enough argument. But that's no longer going to be the case. Sanders is going to be the winner by wide margins. All of the polls are showing. Chances are extremely good that it'll be him and Biden right out the gate, and Biden will fade. Biden will fade as they head into Super Tuesday, as the big major voting happens. And Bernie will win places he won last time, while Biden will fade out. And then when it comes to the convention, the superdelegates will be given the choice. Do they care about democracy or don't they? My view is that they won't. They won't care about democracy. Is that they will get in Sanders' way. That they will put up a corporate candidate. Because ultimately, they don't actually care. They don't care if it's their guy or Trump. They were a bit skittish when Trump got in. What's ironic about Trump's victory, of course, is it means the Republican Party is more democratic than the Democratic Party, without a doubt. But the only reason why people were skittish about Donald Trump's election is because they weren't sure if he was going to be on side with the corporate structure. He ran on this sort of populist, we're going to get these billionaires, we're going to show them how dare they do these things to us kind of platform. But that was all just a con. That was just a con game. And it's obvious now that it was just a con. He wasn't, at no point was he interested in any of that. He wasn't telling the truth at all. He was just lying about the whole thing. And so, if the Democratic Party reveals its hand and says, we're not interested in democracy, we're interested in corporate power, we don't actually care if Bloomberg wins or Biden wins or whoever wins, because Trump is already servicing corporate power well enough. And so this becomes the legitimate strategy, I feel, of the Democratic Party. They don't actually care about seizing power or seizing the presidency, because they're not that different from the Republicans, ultimately. They don't actually care about the people. They don't actually care about these issues. They've made that very clear, that they don't actually care. What they care about is money for themselves, power and wealth and prestige for themselves. They don't care about anything else. And they're getting that under a Trump presidency, so why fight that hard to overthrow him? The true threat to the corporate structure and to Donald Trump, but also to all of it, is Bernie Sanders. And so now Bernie Sanders he stands as this sort of symbol. He's very outspoken, and he's got the record to back it up. He's not going to, I would be very surprised to see him back off and say, oops, it was all a con. It's just not what his 20-year record says that he will do. But that's very scary if you're in this position of power. And so ultimately the proof will be in the pudding, right? Will America plunge itself into complete fascism with no chance of reprieve, which is what will happen if Sanders is shunted off. If Sanders is shunted off, then democracy is a farce. It doesn't actually matter. The voices that make it into the halls of power, that are anti-corporate, will be shunted into a corner, and they'll be dealt with. You know, they're not a serious threat until there's enough of them to form any kind of block. And right now, what do you have? You have like AOC, you know, you've got a smattering of voices that are willing to stand up and call corporate power structures and the billionaire class what it is, which is illegitimate and nonsense. But will they choose to go full fascist, to just do away with this democratic entertainment system and just run the country as they already do, as military dictators and corporate dictators? Or will they actually bow to the concept of democracy? Will they actually say, okay, the people have spoken, and we have to abide at least that the leader they want is Bernie Sanders, and so that's the leader they're going to get. Okay, you guys have yourselves a nice one. I hope you're having a good life out there. Love you all.